you're familiar with Iowa's struggles at the quarterback position, and it's interesting. Adrian Martinez is the one guy who I've been told by multiple sources that
Wow.
Iowa actually reached out to him during the offseason.
That is not
Which
on brand for Iowa.
no, well, it's not, but it should be. But they reached out to him, I guess, and obviously, Kansas State had an in with him, I believe, because of his girlfriend being there. But anyways, I digress. We can get to Illinois. Talk about quarterback play at Illinois.
They should have defeated Indiana.
Yeah.
And now they go to Wisconsin. Of course, a number of people are going to discount that win as Wisconsin is really down this year. But still, they go to Camp Randall and win by 3 scores. Seems as though Brett Bielema has maintained his foundation of what he believes in terms of offensive and defensive football, but learned a lot at the NFL level, as he has mentioned. And, what's your overall take before we get down to more details on this Illinois football revival of sorts?
Yeah, things are definitely moving in the right direction. There's a lot of optimism around the program and just a lot of excitement around the fan base about what Coach B has done with the Illini over the last 2 years. And really what's been impressive to me, guys, is obviously the transition and the improvement of the defense over the last 2 years. Under Lovie Smith, it was one of the worst defenses in college football for his entire tenure. But Ryan Walters, the defensive coordinator, has done an incredible job leading that group to being now probably on the same level as Iowa. I think they're a top 5 overall defense in the country. They're number 1 in the country in scoring defense. They're top 10, I know, in both rushing and pass efficiency defense. So they've been tearing it up this year, really picked up where they were last year. And on the offensive side of the ball, they have energy, something they didn't have last year. With Tony Peterson being the offensive coordinator last year, Barry Lunny comes in from UTSA, and it's kind of a modern offense in the way things kind of work, but it still has some traditional traits to it with the ideas of running the ball, like Brett Bielema has obviously believed in from his success at Wisconsin and his success at Arkansas. But there's now modern twist to it with the passing game. It's higher tempo. It's hitting in the passing game with slants, outs, screen passes. All those things have contributed to Tommy DeVito having a lot of success early this season.
Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
I was just going to say along those same lines about the defense, Alec, the result and the performance that really woke me up to this Illinois team this year was the Virginia game, because they played them last year. And Brennan Armstrong's a top-notch 10 or 15 quarterback in the country, and he just torched them last year. 5 touchdowns, 400 yards. And I didn't see much of the game. And then I went back and watched highlights and dug into it a little bit when I saw 24-3. How does anybody hold Virginia to 3 points they've got like 3 legitimate NFL receivers and Armstrong at quarterback. And then I was like, wow, they're doing this now every week, regardless of the level of opponent.
Yeah, and it really starts at the defensive line for them. And the way that Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph have played on the defensive line for them really all season has been really impressive. I believe Johnny Newton leads the entire country in pressures for a defensive lineman. I believe that's according to PFF. I think Keith Randolph's also in the top 10 in that category. But then Calvin Avery, a former 4-star prospect down from Texas, has really kind of stepped into this role as a run stuffer for them in the middle of the defensive line, and that's been huge. And then on the outside, Seth Coleman, another 4-star prospect, has kind of turned into a pretty solid player at outside linebacker. They did lose their first starting outside linebacker this season at the buck position. That's like their heavier, more traditional like pass rushing position. It's kind of a lot like a defensive end. Ezekiel Holmes, he suffered a knee injury that'll keep him out for the rest of the year. But a true freshman, Gabe Hackus, has come in and he's contributed well for them to start the year. And he's someone they kind of won over Tennessee at signing day last year. So that was a big win. But the back half of the defense has been great. I think there's probably 3 NFL players in the secondary when you look at what Devin Witherspoon does at cornerback. Sidney Brown's really good at safety. And then Quan Martin in their star role, it's essentially just a nickelback, has been really, really impressive this year as well. And at free safety, they have Kendall Smith. He has 3 or 4 interceptions this year. Obviously, Kirby Joseph played that position last year and had 5 picks and ended up being a 3rd-round pick. I don't know if Kendall Smith has that type of ceiling as a player, but the defense's top line has been really impressive this year, especially at the defensive line and in the secondary.
Why can't they get people in seats?
It's a really good question. And I think the biggest answer to that is it's a fan base that is so beat down over the last 20 years. In my life, I was born in 1999. Illinois, I believe, has had 3 years of 2 years, maybe, of a winning Big Ten record. And one of those came in 2001. The other came in 2007. And that might be the last time they had a winning Big Ten record. And when you look at the struggles they had in the 2010s with Tim Beckman, obviously Lovie Smith wasn't like an awesome hire. He invigorated energy and brought credibility to the program, something that it really needed after Tim Beckman was fired for player abuse allegations. But it's a fan base that's incredibly beat down. It's been tormented with embarrassing losses for an entire decade. And it's hard to buy into that year over year. So I think that has a lot to do with it. Now, this weekend, they're really trying everything they can to get as many people inside Memorial Stadium. I know today I saw on social media that generous donors had bought enough tickets for 1,000 students to get free tickets. They're trying to give out rally towels. It being a 6:30 o'clock kickoff at night, I think there might be, 45, 50,000 people in there, especially coming off of a big win at Wisconsin.
I just, because comparing with Mark earlier, is comparing Illinois to Rutgers, because a couple weeks ago, Iowa played Rutgers and Rutgers sold out.
Yeah.
But you're right. Rutgers has had more success in the last 2 decades, I would like to think, than Illinois in their previous respective conference. So I just, as soon as I saw the score of the Wisconsin-Illinois game this past Saturday, I thought, well, that game's going to be sold out. And when I saw a tweet yesterday that there were like 20,000 tickets still available, I'm thinking, holy cow. Does that stadium hold more than 60,000?
I think it holds right about at 60,000 now. I'd have to go double check on the capacity numbers there. Wow. I know in the past, before they renovated the west side, where they put in all those luxury boxes and renovated the press box area and everything for people like us, it held closer to like 80 or 90, I want to say. But yeah, the attendance has been a big issue for them. And it's kind of trickled into this being like the whole mission of the athletic department and Josh Whitman this year, the athletic director, to try and get as many butts in the seats at Memorial Stadium, because as you guys know with Iowa, right? Like, you fill your football stadium, there's a lot of money that comes into your athletic department on a week over week basis. And it helps you distribute those dollars to other athletic funds and areas that need money. And it allows you to reinvest it back into the football program, which only leads to more success.
I'll be interested to see if Iowa can run the ball. I mean, I've never seen anybody hold Wisconsin to 2 rushing yards. And I get that's accounting sacks, but it's not like they sacked him a dozen times. I mean, that was what happened with Braylon Allen in that game, because I never got a chance to watch that game because we were on the post-game show for Iowa. Actually happened with Braylon in that game.
Yeah, so I wasn't able to watch a ton of it because Kansas State was actually playing Texas Tech at the same time. But I do know that Keith Randolph and Johnny Newton both played really well on the defensive line. And I know Calvin Avery has been very good for much of this season as well at the defensive line. And then their linebackers had a pretty good game as well. Their linebackers, Tariq Barnes, CJ Hart, and Isaac Darkangelo, the 3 of them haven't had, like a headlining game where they've been super, super impressive and racked up a whole bunch of really impressive numbers, but they've been kind of solid throughout. I've been really impressed with Tariq Barnes throughout his entire career as a blitzer and as a run stuffer. So he's kind of maintained that same level of production, but really it all starts with the defensive line. The push that Keith Randolph and Johnny Newton get is incredible off the edge. And Calvin Avery, someone who weighs around 360 pounds right at the middle, and you struggle to run through that, right? And I think I highlighted before the game for people that my biggest key for Illinois getting a win was going to be their ability to stop the run. And they did that. And I didn't think they'd win by the score and the margin that they did if they stopped the run, but they did. So it was obviously a pretty impressive outing.
I'm just curious, your perspective. I know you weren't alive, and neither was I when Brett Bielema was at Iowa, but I'm just curious, what's your hunch? If Kirk Ferentz retired tomorrow, would Brett Bielema be willing to jump ship from one Big Ten school to the next and go to Iowa?
It's really funny you asked that. I have a really, really good friend from school. He's still in school. He's a senior at Illinois now. And our favorite thing to talk about in the world is college football coaching carousel. We discovered this last year. We would talk for hours about this last year after LSU fired Ed Orgeron, and then a few other jobs came up, and we were always trying to find the right spots. And Wisconsin fires Paul Chryst, which we kind of had a hunch, right? Like this could be coming. I'm sure you guys had the same thing. We didn't think it would happen this way. And I said to him, I was like, does Wisconsin call? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think he goes back there. I think those bridges are probably burnt. Iowa's another interesting one, right? Like, I think he's really happy at Illinois. I think that it's the state he's from. He's started to build it. And I also think he takes a lot of pride in this idea of this being his career defining job. Because I think people are always going to look at the Wisconsin thing and say he inherited what Barry Alvarez had made into what we all know Wisconsin as today. And then he obviously goes to Arkansas and struggles. If he comes to Illinois and turns in Illinois into a model similar to that of Wisconsin or Iowa, which is what they really, really want to be, Brett Bielema is going to have a statue. Brett Bielema is going to have a street named after him somewhere in Champaign, because Illinois fans haven't had someone like that literally ever. And would he leave for Iowa? Maybe. I don't know. That's hard to project. I guess a better question for you guys is to follow up. Like, do you think Kirk Ferentz is considering retirement? Because from the outside, like, I don't get that sense at all. Now, maybe it's one of those things where you either make a move at your offensive coordinator position or you leave. So maybe that's how Iowa does it. I don't really know, but do you see him leaving soon?
No. He just signed in 29. I don't think most Iowa fans want Kirk Ferentz to leave right now, but some do. But you're right. I mean, the logical move is for the administration to tell Kirk, you got to make a change at OC. So it's more of a theoretical question. I mean, our hypothetical question. I do think Brett would. Now, you covered Illinois under Brett Bielema. I do think he would leave, based on what I know about Brett, but I could also be wrong. And I don't know, like the support, I think fan support, Mark, would you agree fan support is the major thing that separates these two programs? Illinois has a hotbed for recruiting if they can tap into it. I mean, they're in a great spot, but I just don't know fan support wise. Maybe he'll build them back into something, and they've traditionally been a basketball school. But I think Iowa's, without question, because of that, is a better job. But everywhere else, as far as recruiting base and, I mean, everything else, I would say facilities-wise, I think most Big Ten schools have caught up to the norm, and it relates to recruiting or to facilities. Mark, would you agree with that those schools are relatively close, with the exception being the fan support?
Well, I would think that most coaches would want to believe that what they're accomplishing on the field matters, that people care, that people are invested and enthused about it. And the energy that you have to get from walking into 70,000 Rabbit fans at Kinnick Stadium versus 38,000 fans at Illinois, who many are there. We're seeing an example of it right now. Even if they get close to filling that stadium, they were doing everything possible to conjure up people and beg them to come in. So that doesn't even measure the disparity between the two. And I have to think that even though there are a lot of guidelines that have to be placed on facility upgrades, and I'm sure the conference is certainly holding universities to certain standards, that a place like Iowa has much more incentive to pump into their football program because of the numbers that are demanding that and expecting that and celebrating that, versus at a place like Illinois.
Yeah, so I think it's an intriguing conversation. But as it relates to this game, Alec, let's not forget that Illinois probably, I mean, I shouldn't say probably should have won, but like these last two seasons, this matchup have been very much in doubt for Iowa. 2 years ago, Iowa was struggling mightily on offense, and Spencer Petras actually had one of his better halves of his career in the second half in Champaign. If we're talking about just singular halves where he actually played well. And then in 2021, if it wasn't for a Charlie Jones kickoff return for a touchdown, they probably lose at Kinnick. I hate to say that, but the offense is not equipped, as we found out Saturday, to make a big comeback. And they were down, I think, 10 in that game at home.
I was just trying to rack my brain to remember whether that statement's ever been uttered on the show that Iowa was struggling mightily on offense. Have
I thought
anybody
you were
ever
going to bring
stated
up the
that?
fact. I thought you were going to bring up the fact that I'm highlighting the best half of Petrus' career. Well, I
Or
mean, I not
highlighting that Charlie Jones, who no longer is on the Iowa roster,
right.
was,
Yeah.
was the guy that was making the big play.
I mean, I think a lot of Iowa fans are going to be equating this game to Rutgers from 2 weeks ago, where, or Maryland from last year, where the inferior team has some wins early in the season, but hasn't really been tested yet. But, Illinois has been tested. I don't think Wisconsin's the walking dead. I mean, I still think personnel-wise, what they did in Madison is nothing compared to, or what I should say, what Rutgers has done so far this year in their wins is nothing compared to just this one win that Illinois had this past week. And let's not forget, Illinois dominated Wyoming. They dominated Chattanooga. They should have beaten Indiana. I mean, they should be undefeated right now. They should be 5-1, or excuse me, 5-0, right? They're 4-1 right now.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, they should be undefeated.
I just I haven't made my pick yet. The line has moved to 4. Is that right, Mark?
That's what I'm seeing.
Okay.
I'm seeing that Memorial Stadium at the University of Illinois was as high a capacity as 71,000 in the late 1990s, 2001, and then they've kind of knocked it down ever since. So now it's at 60,000 plus, 6670.
I will say this about, I like what you kind of said there about Illinois having not really played anyone, because I do kind of agree with it, because they're non-conference, while Wyoming has proven to be like good at the group of 5. It's a Wyoming. It's a program that you should handle, right? It's a Big Ten team.
And they had problems in the offseason. They had some off-field, they had some coaching issues.
They had a ton of transfers.
Transfer portal issues, yeah.
I think they had more kids. I want to say it was like 30, and that could be wrong. They had a huge number of kids transfer out and go to different schools because they've had a lot of success here recently, what Wyoming has. And then they handled their business against Chattanooga. Obviously, like we said, that's an FCS school. You should. But the loss to Indiana was only dominated that game really the entire time, but they turned it over 4 or 5 times. They had 1 or 2 calls go Indiana's favor. One of them took a touchdown off the board, and it would have ended up leading to Illinois winning that game. And I'm never someone who likes to blame the officials. And if you're letting the officials have an influence over the outcome of the game, like, that's a problem in the first place, especially when you dominated that game like Illinois did. But I agree with what you said there about Wisconsin, not being the walking dead. Like, they're still Wisconsin. You know what I mean? Wisconsin's not a program that I don't think Wisconsin's going to go win 3-4 games this entire season. I don't think you guys think that either. I mean, they're a program that's floor is so high because they don't tend to beat themselves. They don't tend to lose games because of mistakes and mental errors that lead to coverage bust or tons of turnovers and interceptions. And yeah, Graham Mertz has been bad or not up to the level that Wisconsin has always hoped that he would be again this season. But I think Wisconsin's a team that probably still ends up going to a bowl game at the end of the day. And yeah, Illinois hasn't made any huge statements in terms of opponents that they've beaten, but the way they handled this going up to Camp Randall and winning is a major statement, because nobody goes to Camp Randall and wins. I believe they had only had 2 losses against Big Ten West teams at Camp Randall since the divisions moved to the East-West model before last week. So now it's up to 3, and that could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. So like, that's a major statement. And you say that it's -4 now. Did it open at 3, guys, or did it open at 3.5?
It's at 3, I believe.
So it essentially opened as a pick'em because the home team gets 3 points. Illinois, people love to bet on Illinois this year. The Wisconsin game moved majorly in Illinois' favor. The Wyoming game moved hugely in their favor. So did the Indiana game. And I know the Chattanooga game was a weird game to bet on, but the Virginia game moved in their favor big time after losing the way they did against Indiana the week before. So, and I've started to pay a little bit more attention to this betting stuff, and I don't gamble, but it's important to follow and keep up with. But bettors love Illinois this year for whatever.
Well, they've covered every week, haven't they, besides the Indiana week?
I think so, yeah. And they've covered like handily in most of these games because they smoked Virginia. Xavier, how do you say his last name? I don't want to butcher it. Good as well. And I don't know how much he's been playing this year for them, but
They're burning his red shirt as a gunner.
That's really silly. I mean,
Well,
I feel like they've had a lot of special teams players go through there. I wouldn't want to waste a red shirt on that, but considering all the success Iowa has had with defensive backs over the last 20 years, I don't know if wasting a red shirt is going to be that big of a deal, because that is the most talented defensive back that they have had in a really long time.
I've been saying this for a while. I know that we're going past our mark here, Alec, but I've been saying this for several weeks now, that they've struggled with health at wide receiver. He was a darn good wide receiver at Southeast Polk as well. It wouldn't hurt to have a few plays in the playbook for him on a go route, or even as a decoy, send him in on offense. Because, I don't think wasting his red shirt on as a gunner I don't think he's going to be there 5 years, so it probably doesn't matter. But, man, if you're going to use the red shirt up, you might as well see what you can do and get creative. But Iowa's not what we'd think of as a real creative offense, Alec. So,
no. And I guess I do have a question for you guys, and this kind of relates a little bit to the Wisconsin job, as you guys are still in the Big Ten circle of things and talking to more Big Ten people than I am. But do you think that Iowa and Wisconsin kind of need to modernize just a little bit to be successful under the model that they have? I think Wisconsin is obviously an open job, and I think in a perfect world, Jim Leonhard, right, wins 5-6 games to end of the year. Even 3-4 games 4 games, 5 games might be enough to allow him to keep that job next year. But do you think that those schools need to tinker with their offensive style just a little bit to find success on a national level as the Big Ten moves away from divisions? Because by all indications, that's going to be happening, if not next year in 2024, when USC and UCLA join, to still find success in football and this new modern era where offenses kind of dominate everything.
I'll go first on this, and maybe Mark can speak to Wisconsin. I mean, Iowa's got to do so much right now. You don't get to where they're at offensively without needing an overhaul. So, I mean, I think the word modernize, sometimes people, when they hear that, they think, oh, Iowa's going to go spread. No, that's not what we mean at all.
They don't need to do that.
No. But I mean, honestly, Mark, again, you're a better authority as it relates to Wisconsin than I am, but Wisconsin has won a whole lot of games, and more games than Iowa has, and more divisions than Iowa has, and been competitive in bigger games than Iowa has, with similar style. I mean, they run their primarily a gap scheme in the run game, but behind these ridiculously physical and talented backs and insane offensive lines, I think that can survive in this day and age. But you can't survive with average offensive lines and average running backs, which is what Iowa has had. So yes, unless Iowa can find a way to recruit consistently better or develop even better, even though they've done well developing individuals on the offensive line. And I am encouraged by the way Iowa's recruited. We're talking about recruited at running back. They've got a couple talented guys in there who are freshmen this year, and they had Kendrick Raphael, who was committed, impressive 4-star from Florida, who's now decommitted. So I do think Iowa needs to modernize. I just don't know exactly to what extent. Mark?
Alec, the term that you used in there that completely changes my answer is national. To compete on a national level, yes. To continue to operate at the level that they have, meaning Iowa and Wisconsin, for the last 10 to 20 years, I believe that because they're still major brands with certain cachet, that they're going to be able to draw reasonably high recruiting classes. And then if they can stay with the formula that they've built, which is, again, to Corey's point, Wisconsin's done it so much more successfully with the great running back line that they've brought through like a conveyor belt for the last 25 to 30 years, plus the offensive lines, that they could still churn out 8-4, 9-3 teams on a consistent basis in this division against the likes of the competition that they play every week. But unlike when Maryland and Rutgers were added to the conference 10 years ago, 2 other schools are being added to the conference that, especially one of them, is serious. And the other one has the potential. I've always thought UCLA was a sleeping giant. And if those 2 get added in such a way, whether we're looking at divisions or pods, Maryland and Rutgers just turned out to be 2 more teams that the teams in the East, and then on a rotational basis, the teams in the West could beat on and get extra wins. But now you're adding 2 teams from the West that are going to, if things don't change in Iowa and Wisconsin, are going to most likely beat them down further down the ranks of the Big Ten. So yes, they're going to have to upgrade.
And it does make it. Let me just add one more thing, Alec. It does make a difference too when we're talking about style of play. Like who you have. I don't care what brand of football you're talking. Who's playing quarterback has a big role in this, right? So, like, I mean, I think Wisconsin is absolutely, whether we're talking about the Paul Chryst era or now the post Paul Chryst era, has shown the willingness to evolve. And whether we're talking scheme or personnel, you know, they are credited. I know we're going a ways back. They're credited with grabbing Russell Wilson from what, NC State.
Yeah.
And let's not forget they made a hard push for Caleb Williams in the offseason.
Isn't that hilarious?
So, I mean, but you know what? If I'm a Wisconsin fan, I'm thinking, attaboy, Barry, let's keep this going, because they right now you have more faith in where they're headed. I think from you're talking about a modernization standpoint than where Iowa is on offense.
Yeah, my thing with Wisconsin and Iowa to a point, and I don't want to comment too much on Iowa because I don't like to speculate on people losing their jobs or whatever, before, especially someone like Kirk Ferentz, who has essentially made himself a legend there and whatever. But I think that Wisconsin and Iowa have found something that works. Like, that is their identity. It works, stick with it. But you also kind of need to tinker with things just a little bit here and there to make sure that that still continues to work, right? Like, not everyone can go from trestle ball at Ohio State to not even a full decade later, I guess a decade later now, having the number one offense in college football undisputed because of all the talent they have at quarterback, wide receiver, and running back. Like, very few people can do that. But I think Iowa and Wisconsin have found something that works for them and can continue to work for them if you just tinker with it a little bit and modernize it just a tiny little bit in areas here or there. And I do think that Wisconsin is in a good position now where things work well for Jim Leonard. You win 4 games in the year, go to a bowl game, decide that's your guy. You want to keep him as your head coach, keep things in the organization or keep things in the family, as people like to say in college football, right? Like, he's a very highly regarded mind on the defensive side in college football. And you keep things the same offensively, but you tinker just a little bit. So you're able to, like you said, attract a more talented quarterback, though Graham Mertz was supposed to be better and it ended up not working. Attract more wide receiver talent. So your offensive output through the air is higher and more efficient and more successful, while also combining that with a really successful rushing attack and a potent offensive line like we've seen Wisconsin and Iowa have for so long. I just think the entire dynamic of college football is just really interesting right now. And if there's one like overarching thought that I have from the Wisconsin decision to move away from Paul Chryst when they did, it's that Wisconsin's not messing around with the idea of falling behind in Illinois, Minnesota, potentially Purdue in the Big Ten, not just West, but as we move forward in the Big Ten overall. And that shows like Big Ten schools might start acting like SEC schools when it comes to financial decisions, coaching decisions, all those things. And they're going to have the ability to, because they're going to have the money from the TV contract that they just signed.
And whether you want to admit it or not, you're talking about use the term messing around. They're trying to avoid at all costs that happening. Whether you want to admit it or not, as an Iowa fan, Iowa is messing around with potentially taking a huge step back as programs like Minnesota, Illinois, you know, even potentially Nebraska. We'll see what happens there. I mean, and you brought up the divisions going away and the additions of USC and UCLA. This is a pivotal time in the Kirk Ferentz era